USCHO.com.
Welcome to USCHO Edge for Friday, October 21st, 2022. Each week we handicap and prognosticate some top games this weekend. This podcast is sponsored by DCU Digital Federal Credit Union. What will DCU mean to you? Find out today by visiting dcu.org. Membership required. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly and Dan Rubin. Another slate of games and some toss-ups in there, maybe a couple of surprising favorites, but why don't we dive right in? This is an interesting matchup. We've been talking about UConn. Connecticut ranked number 14 this week at number 9 BU. And Jim, with it being a toss-up, really seems like the odds makers are thinking quite a bit of the Huskies.
Well, I think that the odds makers are probably a little confused too. You know, they made this game minus 150 for each team. So yes, that's just a true pick 'em over under 5.5. I think that nobody really knows what Boston University are getting these days. You know, they absolutely laid an egg last Friday night out in Ann Arbor. A 9-2 loss, got into a lot of penalty trouble, but then played a more disciplined game. Never really led until late, but they took a late lead in the rematch on Sunday with Michigan, end up with a 3-2 victory. So I think that right now you just don't know what BU team you're getting each night. The same can't be said for UConn. They are putting forth some great performances to this point. 5-0-1. That they had their test last weekend, and that was Ohio State. They end up getting a tie on Friday, and then a 6-1 win on Saturday. So I feel like this UConn team is a little bit more tested. The fact that they're on the road on Friday, I think, is a big determining factor. I think if they were at home, they'd be a slight favorite, like a minus 130 or minus 135. But I think going on the road into BU, that's one that has the odds makers shaking their head a little.
Jimmy, I tend to agree. Specifically about UConn, when you don't know which BU team is coming in and they're going on the road to BU, as you mentioned, Connecticut scored 5 unanswered at home to beat Ohio State. When you look at what UConn did in that game, they got progressively better as the game went on. So if you're trying to handicap it, you're trying to look, you don't know which BU team is going to show up. Your answer is going to come early, especially if UConn gets on the gas pedal in the second and in the third period and starts scoring some goals against a Terrier team that is susceptible to like we said, laying the proverbial goose egg down the proverbial egg down there in a result. Not a goose egg, but an egg.
This is one Jim likes to say he would stay away from. This is one that I would have to stay away from because this is just too dangerous, I think. Even the over-under. I think everybody's over-unders are too low, too.
Right now, the way that some of these scores have been over the last few weekends, I think that you should be staying away. It's a reality that we've got a lot of goal scoring going on right now. We said it on Monday when we were talking with Derek Schooley, and I'm going to have to remember this off the top of my head. I think 16 power plays at 33.3% or better, and 25, I believe, penalty kills that are at 75% or worse. So that's not exactly resounding numbers, but those are unsustainable numbers. I think, as Derek Schooley pointed out, you can't have a power play that's going to run at 44% all year. If you do, hey, good for you, but you're winning. You're probably winning a national championship. But that 40, anybody that's above 30% on the power play, doesn't feel sustainable. You got to think that most people's numbers will come back into that 24, 25% for a really good power play. That might eventually take the goal scoring down. And, talking with Norm Bazin yesterday, he said the first couple of weekends, you don't know what you have with your special teams. And he said, you're now working on it all the time. So I think teams are trying to get better at both the power play and the penalty kill. So that might take scoring down, but I don't see it happening right away. I look at all of these over-unders that we're going to talk about today. None of them are higher than 6. I would be hammering the over on every game right now.
Well, let's talk about the next game on the list. Number 7, North Dakota, which had to claw back to get a tie against Quinnipiac and then got thumped by the Bobcats on Saturday. They are at number 1, Minnesota, which had the weekend off last weekend.
Yeah, when I think of this one, Ed, I'm and Jimmy, I'm looking at this with North Dakota, and I'm saying, this is a road dog coming off of a disappointing loss to Quinnipiac, and the way they had to come back in that first game. They took the lead, they were down, and then they come back, they take a lead, they lose the lead, they finish with the official tie. You're going on the road to take on the number one team in the nation, who is idle in a massive rivalry game. For me, you know what? I throw everything out the window at that point, and I say this is going to be a referendum on North Dakota. If North Dakota is going to be a team that wants to be number one in the country or wants to be kind of that type of team, they're going to go in and they're going to have something to prove in this, and they're going to be able to prove it against the team that, I still am maybe not sold early on Minnesota. So that's kind of where I'm looking at North Dakota and saying, you have a road underdog, disappointing loss, a team that's supposed to be that good in a rivalry game in Minneapolis. Sure. Why not? Like, if you want to live a little dangerously with North Dakota over someone this weekend.
Yeah, I'm really with you there. I mean, how often will we ever be on this podcast talking about North Dakota as an underdog? They're almost always favored. Even once they get into the tough NCHC schedule, they're usually favored. So plus 120 on North Dakota right now, minus 150 on Minnesota. I would not touch that minus 150. It's just too high for a minus number when you're laying that type of odds. I know that you want to say that Minnesota's a favorite, but they were idle, and idle is not always the best. I know that things did not work well for North Dakota, but if that didn't put a fire in their belly and give them, some time to regroup and work on a lot of things that were probably deficient against a good Quinnipiac team last week, I think that North Dakota is going to come in hungrier. I think that they're going to, especially on Friday night, things are going to pop on Friday. And if I had to make a pick on this game, North Dakota is where I'm heading. By the way, over under this one 6. Hammer the over on that. Good Lord, I see this being like a 5-3 game at best. It could get up to 6-4 easily. These teams have played some unbelievably high scoring, crazy games over the years. So I think 6 is way too low on the.
I'm going the other way. I'm going the other way on this. You might think I'm crazy, but if you're going to hedge something, this is the you look at it and like, where do we want to hedge? Let's hedge on the under on this one. You got North Dakota, who played. I know there were a lot of goals last weekend, but their style, which is a little more dump and chasey, like I could see this. I could see this kind of sneaking in. This is one of those where you're like, oh yeah, they're going to score goals. I could see that sneaking in underneath.
Well, if Minnesota gets up a goal or two, the momentum is really going to swing their way. Mariucci has had some sparse crowds over the last, COVID year, no crowd, but it's been hard to get a sellout there sometimes. It's not going to be a problem with North Dakota coming in. People are really high on the Gophers. Bob Motzko has them playing very well. They could very well be this year's national champion. Watch out for that one. I hear where you're coming from on this one. I got to like Minnesota in this one.
I don't mind Minnesota. I just don't like the price.
Mm-hmm.
Minus 150, laying 150 to win 100 on it just doesn't feel like a good price when I'm really thinking, okay, hey, maybe Minnesota's going to win, but this should be as much of a pick 'em as any game. And like I said, that hungry North Dakota team is the reason I'd be staying away from that minus 150.
If Ed's right, he can let us both know next week.
Yeah, I stay away from all of them. So
we only talk about this. Does anybody ever realize that all we do is talk about these? We never actually bet on them.
No, are you crazy? I would. I actually don't. I've not in a million years.
Western Michigan is a slight favorite at Notre Dame. For some reason, for me, this feels like a pivotal weekend for the Fighting Irish.
I agree. It's. And it's not, we're not deep into the season. And I've looked at Jeff Jackson teams over time, and his teams always do seem to build toward improvement, every single week, every single month. So I don't think that there's any, panic button being pressed in South Bend, but I think that they'd like to get more consistent. They haven't had a lot of consistency in their games. Western Michigan, I think a lot of people were really high on them coming into the season, but I think they're proving that some of their losses from last year are more significant. So this is a really hard one for me to handicap. The fact that they're giving Western the road favorite at minus 130, Notre Dame even 100, straight plus 100, even money with an over under of 6. I don't know. I wouldn't. This is one that I stay away from. But if I had to make a pick on it, I'd probably end up just going Notre Dame, just using home ice, even though they have not been a good home ice team. I should, over time historically in the last few years, Notre Dame not a good home ice team, but I'll still take home ice here.
Yeah, that's kind of the two words that you threw out there, Jimmy, are the two that I'm kind of pivoting on, which is road favorite. And anytime you have a favorite on the road, you have to really look at why the team would be the favorite. And in Western Michigan's case, based on everything they did with Bowling Green and that weekend and how Notre Dame kind of struggled a bit to beat Northern Michigan with a couple of close games, plus Notre Dame's proclivity or lack thereof at home. You really have to look at why a team is a road favorite. And when you look at all of those factors, I go the opposite direction from you, which is if you're going to handicap it and say this team is a favorite on the road, that's kind of a bold statement when you're dealing with the caliber of a Western Michigan, you're dealing with the caliber of the Notre Dames of the world. And to me, instead of making it a pick 'em and to say we're gonna ride Western Michigan as the favorite, that to me is an indicator that right now Notre Dame probably going down in this one. And I know if I had my say in it, that's why they play the games. But that I'm rolling Western Michigan here.
Hey, you know what? You're talking me into it.
Hey,
is this maybe one where you could play the under?
Potentially. I mean, both teams here have been pretty good defensively in general. Over under 6. So yeah, potentially. If there's any of the 5 games we're going to talk about where I'd go under, this is one of them. The final game we talk about maybe is another, but this is certainly one of them. I like that play as well, Ed.
Well, let's take a pause, and we've got 2 more games to look at. But USCHO Edge is sponsored by DCU Digital Federal Credit Union. Visit dcu.org.
Know how people say life happens? Well, for me, life was happening, and I needed a new truck. I didn't have time to shop around for a good loan, so I got one from the dealer, higher interest and all. Month after month, those payments were squeezing me. So I went to DCU. They refinanced my loan and helped lower my rate, which lowered my payments. These days, I have more money in my pocket for whatever life throws at me. What will DCU mean to you? Insured by NCUA. Membership required. Visit dcu.org.
We're back with USCHO Edge. I'm Ed Trefzger along with Jim Connelly and Dan Rubin. Next one on the list is a very interesting one to me. Number 11, Providence at number 4, Denver. Denver minus 210, Providence plus 170. Everybody's thinking about Denver getting thumped, 4-2 loss on Friday, 3-0 shutout by UMass last weekend. But let's remember a couple of things about the Friday game. First of all, Luke Pavicic made 45 saves for UMass in that game. UMass was outshot 47-15, 45 saves, including 20 in the third period when Denver tried to claw back with a couple of goals. So Denver didn't get blown out of the building, so to speak, although it was a couple of huge losses. But man, the line on this one is just enormous.
Well, I think this is our bookmakers saying there's no way Denver loses 3 in a row. It's that simple. They're too good of a team to really not show up. And listen, I called those 2 games last weekend, and despite that big shot disparity on Friday night, Denver didn't show up on that game. They were not good for 2 periods. They finally turned it on in the third. They were getting shots for 2 periods, but they were perimeter shots with no traffic, not taking the puck to the net. They did that in bunches in the third, and Pavicic had to be fantastic for UMass. But their effort on night 2 was a lot better, and then didn't have a little bit of puck luck, not scoring goals. Right now, it's one of those teams, Denver, where I think that they're maybe gripping their sticks a little bit. They know that they have plenty of offensive ability on that team. There's tons of great players up and down the lineup, but they also realize that they lost 4 really good goal scorers from last year's national championship team. So when you put all that together, I think when you have any struggles, you start gripping the stick a little bit. Providence, they've had a couple of good efforts of late, but I still think that you have to kind of, you have to favor Denver at home. I believe that Friday is going to be when they finally raise their banner for the national championship. They didn't do it during the icebreaker because it was technically a tournament. So I think this is the night they're going to finally raise that banner. And this is one where I kind of sit there and say, I think the fans are going to be into it. They'll get momentum on their side. They're going to be a tough team to play this weekend.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And my problem too with Providence is that nobody really believes in Providence in this. So if we're looking at what Providence Friars have kind of done with the Clarkson and the Northeastern games, those are nice. I think those are nice results. I think Providence so far has been a nice team, but when you're dealing with Denver, who coming off of that UMass game and coming off the UMass weekend and getting home with the banner, with everything that kind of goes along with it, you're really feeling that they're a team that's going to be able to handle that emotion anyway. And you're bringing in a Providence team that's nice versus an atmosphere that could be really great. To me, I wouldn't touch Providence here. I mean, that's just that's one of those where you look at it and you're like, you know what? I'm gonna hedge Denver pretty good here.
I also see this being another game with an over under of 6 that this could go over pretty easily. Maybe it might be one that ends up getting 4-2 over with an empty net, but still, you don't want to be in a situation where you have the under here and you're looking for at 5 and then it becomes 6 and it's a push. This is a tough one. If you can find the over under at 5.5 out there, then I would hammer the over. I hate the 6 because you got to push probably more times than you'd like to. But I personally think that the under here is a useless bet.
Well, let's look at our final game on the list, and that one is a toss-up. Number 2, Minnesota State at number 8, St. Cloud State, an intra-state matchup and a non-league one for those two teams.
Another pick 'em here, minus 115 on each team. By the way, I've got to argue with sports books making everything minus 115. Dan, you've bet enough sports. You remember when a pick 'em was minus 110, not minus 115. The books are making more money every time. That aside, that's a rant right there. But I like both teams in this, so I do think this is a tougher one. I think people have been pleasantly surprised at how good Minnesota State is. I don't know that anybody knew what this team would look like without Dryden McKay and net. But as we mentioned, I think back on Monday, Ed, the reality is that Minnesota State has begun it's not that their goaltender is not fantastic, but they're systematic and they are a team that really plays their system well. And I think that they are a defensive first team. They limit the shots. They control the puck a ton. And because of that, it doesn't matter if it's Dryden McKay or not in between the pipes. And as long as you have somebody that is serviceable, they're going to be a good team. So I think that is what makes Minnesota State, to me, feel like the team I would pick in this situation. Being on the road, maybe that's a little bit more difficult. Over under of -5.5 on this one. I could see this going under. Like I can see this a 2-1, 3-1 game. I don't see this being a 6-4 game or a 5-3 game. This is one that I really see. Maybe it gets to 4-1 or maybe it gets to 3-2, but you're still staying under that 5.5. You love that number. It does take the push out on 6, but I think 5.5. Go with the under all day.
Well, and to build off of that too, when you're early in the season, you kind of look at the battle-tested teams that have had the toughest games, and you ask whether or not they're coming out of those beat up early on when you don't quite have your legs under you, or are you facing a team that hasn't been battle tested and then they just don't have anything to build on? And I think when you line up these two teams, Minnesota State, 2 very good weekends. They've been battle tested a little bit more than St. Cloud has. I mean, St. Cloud undefeated, but I mean, you're getting your wins against St. Thomas and Wisconsin. You're not necessarily going up against the Gophers, and you're not necessarily seeing some of those teams. So if you're looking kind of within the lines and not necessarily strictly by numbers, or you're looking within what happens on the ice, Minnesota State this early still going to have a lot of energy for a team that has been beaten up a bit, or at least through a weekend. Gone through a physical weekend. So we'll see what St. Cloud kind of has under the hood, but I agree with you. I don't think goal scoring is going to be necessarily the reigning headline. Of course, now that we said that, we're going to have a nice quality 8-6 1987 Edmonton Oilers game, but hey, that's why they play them, right?
Well, we've been seeing a lot of those around college hockey so far this year, and we've been wondering why that's going on. But you're absolutely right. This really is the first big test. And as you were talking about that, I'm saying to myself, How sad is it for Badger fans that we're lumping them in with St. Thomas as not being much of a test?
Yeah, I'm gonna take a couple of mean tweets for that one, but hey, Wisconsin, that's part of it. I mean, until you have the proof in the pudding, that's how the odds makers are at least going to handicap the game when they look at your results and they look at everything that you've gone into. You need to produce the results to get better predictive qualities about your team or be able to factor into those predictive qualities of other teams a little bit more.
By the way, we talk over under. There was only one game on DraftKings listed all weekend that has an over under of 6.5 or higher. Anybody want to take a guess on this one? Okay, I'll give it to you, Ed. You might be a little surprised at this. RIT and Air Force.
Really?
They're expecting Air Force to once again be giving up a ton of goals because that's what they've been doing all season long. So we'll see if that holds true. But
RIT's fifth in the country with 4.5 goals per game on average, so very well could be.
Yeah, and right now the Air Force defense has just not been good. They jumped out to some leads, have been unable to hold on. Gave up, what was it, 7 spot they gave up last Friday night. 6 spot the week before that against Notre Dame, I think. So there's been a lot of goals going in. So I guess nobody should be surprised on that one. And that one, if you have a chance, I would hammer that one to over 6.5.
Wouldn't be surprised. Well, I want to ask you one last thing before we wrap up this episode. And I've been wanting to get some information each week. This question has to do with home ice advantage and whether there is such a thing, especially on Friday night, because some coaches will say, you get on the road, you got the boys in the hotel, there are no distractions, no people around, you can really work as a team. Some coaches will point out, hey, Friday on campus, you got classes, you got fans, you've got girlfriends, you got family, you've got all that stuff to worry about. On the other hand, a home ice environment is terrific. Well, where do you sort out home ice and its effect when you've got a game like this?
It's funny, Ed. I actually asked Rand Pecknold about that specifically this week for the ECAC weekly article on our website, USCHO.com. What I asked him was, because he was out at North Dakota and he called it a Frozen Four type atmosphere. As I said, how much does team bonding going on the road? They're at Maine. They played at Boston College. Like, how much does that help your team? And he goes, well, you always want to play at home in front of your own atmosphere. He said, I think from based on what he has said or what he has said to me, what other coaches have said to me through the years. I know Jerry York was a big proponent of going on the road specifically for the team building aspect. I know we see that a lot with some of the Atlantic hockey schools now that they are able to bring teams into their buildings, that when they go on the road or when teams come, they call it a team bonding. I don't think the distractions are as much if you're worried about things in your own building or you're worried about stuff like that. I think you feed off of it. I do think there is an element now of going on the road in 2022 where you have things around like you said, sitting in your dorm playing video games and there's a party two floors above you. You're not sleeping the same way as you would in a quiet hotel. And that's not to say the players are going out. They're absolutely not. They're on lockdown during the season. But I think when you're at home, you feed off the atmosphere. You want to be there. But early in the season, you do want to get out on the road. You want to have your players without friends who aren't on the team. You want them to strictly stay in that cocoon so that they can get to know each other, feed off of that on the ice, have a night in the hotel, have a catered meal or whatever it is that you're going to eat, go out, get the right food. And I think that is a important thing early in the year. But then as the year moves on, you want to play at home. You want to feed off your atmosphere as much as possible. Yeah,
I always think that question, Ed, of how much is home ice worth, and it's not like football, where football, for years everybody just said, football is 3 points, home field is always 3 points, especially in the NFL. Most bookmakers have taken that down to 2 these days. Anyways, I don't think you get as much of a factor in hockey. Now I look at the 5 teams that we have. We're talking about games for 5 home teams. Boston University hosting UConn, that has not become a rivalry, that has not caught on. So I would not expect a huge atmosphere at BU. I could be wrong about that one. Number 1, Minnesota. Number 7, North Dakota. Minnesota will be sold out. That place will be banging. Notre Dame with Western Michigan. I don't expect that to actually be that great of an atmosphere, especially given that football plays at home the next day. Denver will be banged out. If it's banner raising night, that place will be crowded. In St. Cloud, always a good draw. They do well drawing at home. So some of those buildings, I feel like if you have, if it's Minnesota or Denver or St. Cloud, I would actually sway a little bit toward the home team. But if not, I don't think that it's that much of a factor at home. If anything, I do think that Friday night games, coaches like the atmosphere that they can, or this atmosphere is not the right word, but the environment that they can create when they're on the road, and truly, like as Dan said, real road trips where you're in a hotel, you're not taking a bus that day, you're in the hotel and you're staying over. So that is one of the benefits. You're getting a good night's sleep. You got bed checks. Everything you don't have on campus. The distractions of home are not with you. So I think that if you are playing in a building that doesn't have a huge home ice advantage, then yes, I think that the visiting team then does maybe get their own little boost.
I mean, can I just build off this as from a personal thing, which is that early in the year, I got all this energy. I love covering everything. I'm not tired. I love getting out on the road if I can and getting in the hotel, getting away from my home. And you can kind of read between the lines of having a screaming child at me. I'd rather get away from that for a night. At the end of the year, after you're dealing with a little bit of burnout from the course of the year, and you're kind of running on fumes by the end, and you got to dig deep to even get that last coverage in. You want to stay home and sleep in your own bed. I mean, that's just how I see it. And I got to assume everyone's like me, right?
Well, I hope there aren't too many college hockey players with 2 kids under the age of 18 months in their dorm room. So maybe not.
Maybe not. That was worth a shot.
We have joked about some 50-year players having grandkids, but one last thing on Friday nights. We sometimes do see trends or tendencies with that. Like Michigan last year was obviously a terrific team, but where they seemed to have their most vulnerability was Friday nights at home at Yost.
I think it just can be those distractions. It's hard to, you can be the most well-oiled team, but if you go to get in there, don't have that focus. And listen, when you were Michigan of last year, you had a bullseye on your back every single night. You never felt like you were the underdog. So you're always getting your opponent's best game on that Friday night. And maybe after some adjustments, you get back. It's a little bit more leveled off on Saturday just because you both played a tough game the night before. I think that you can refocus, and that we saw that with Michigan. They were a really good Saturday night team. They came back, and coaches will tell you they don't love the fact that they lose on Friday nights because it does put a lot of pressure on your weekend. You don't want to get swept. But they also love their team that can show some resiliency and come back after that Friday loss. So that's I've heard that from coaches in the past, and it's I think something that's very pertinent to what we're talking about here.
Well, in any case, it's tough to pick up 6 points on a weekend anywhere. And we're going to wrap it there. USCHO Edge is sponsored by DCU Digital Federal Credit Union. Visit dcu.org. Find our podcast at uscho.com/podcasts. Or subscribe on your favorite podcast app. We're available on Apple Podcasts, iHeart, Stitcher, Spreaker, and Spotify. For Jim Connelly and Dan Rubin, I'm Ed Trefzger, and this has been USCHO Edge.